But the Hebrews had only one law, a divine law that embraced life in its minutest details. What could a preacher teach them if he began by declaring that the entire law of the people to whom he preached was inviolable? But let us assume that this is not regarded as a proof. Then let those who assert that Christ's words confirmed the Mosaic law explain to themselves who they were whom Christ denounced during his whole life. Who did he speak against, calling them Pharisees, lawyers, and scribes? Who was it that refused to follow the doctrine of Christ and crucified him? If Christ acknowledged the Mosaic law, where were the true followers of the law whom Christ must have approved of? Is there a single one? We are told that the Pharisees were a sect. The Hebrews do not say so. They call the Pharisees the true fulfillers of the law. But let us suppose they were a sect. The Sadducees were also a sect. Where then were the true believers, those who did not belong to any sect? In the Gospel according to St. John, all the enemies of Christ are called Hebrews. They do not assent to Christ's doctrine. They oppose it only because they are Hebrews. But in the Gospel, the Pharisees and Sadducees are not the only enemies of Christ. The lawgivers who keep the Mosaic law, the scribes who study it, and the elders who are considered as the representatives of the popular wisdom are likewise called the enemies of Christ. Christ says, "I did not come to call the righteous to repentance," to a change of life, metanoia, but sinners. Where were the righteous, and who were they? Surely Nicodemus was not the only one. And even Nicodemus is described as being a good man, but one who had gone astray. We have grown so used to the singular interpretation given to us, that the Pharisees and some wicked Hebrews crucified Christ, that the simple question never occurs to us, where were the true Hebrews who kept the law, and who were neither Pharisees nor wicked men? No sooner does the question arise than all grows clear. Christ, be he God or man, brought his doctrine to a people who already had a law that gave them definite rules of life, and which they called the law of God. In what light could Christ have considered that law? Every prophet, teacher of a faith, on revealing the law of God to a people, will find that they already possess a law that they consider as the divine law, and he cannot avoid a twofold application of the word, as referring either to what men wrongly consider the law of God, your law, or as referring to the true eternal law of God. Moreover, not only is the preacher of the new doctrine unable to avoid the twofold use of the word, but it often happens that he does not even endeavor to do so, and purposely unites both ideas, in order to point out that the law confessed by those he tries to convert, though defective as a whole, is not devoid of some divine truths. And it is just these truths, so familiar to his hearers, which every preacher will take as the basis of his preaching. Christ does so in addressing the Hebrews, who have the same word, Torah, for both laws. Referring to the Mosaic law, and more often still to the prophets, especially the prophet Isaiah, whom he often quotes, Christ acknowledges that in the Hebrew law and in the prophets there are eternal truths, divine truths, which coincide with the eternal law, and he bases his doctrine upon them, as for instance in the saying, "Love God and your neighbor." Christ expresses this idea on many occasions, for example, Luke 10 verse 26. What is written in the law? How do you read it? We may find the eternal truth in the law, if we can read. And he points out more than once that the precept contained in their law of love to God and their neighbor was a precept of the eternal law. After the parables by which he explains his doctrine to his disciples, Christ says, as if in reference to all that had preceded. Therefore every scribe, that is, every man who can read and has been taught the truth, is like a householder who brings forth out of his treasure indiscriminately things old and new. Matthew 13, verse 52. It is thus that St. Irenaeus understands these words, and so does the Church, and yet, arbitrarily transgressing the true sense of the saying, they attribute to these words the meaning that the whole ancient law is sacred. The obvious meaning of the text is that he who seeks for what is good takes not only what is new, but what is old too, and that its being old is not a sufficient reason for throwing it aside. Christ means by this saying that he does not deny what is eternal in the ancient law. But when questioned concerning the law or its forms, he says, "We do not pour new wine into old bottles." Christ could not confirm the whole law, neither could he completely deny the law and the prophets. He could neither deny the law that says, "Love your neighbour as yourself," nor the prophets, in whose word he often clothes his thought. And so, instead of our understanding these clear and simple words as they were said, and in the sense that the whole doctrine of Christ confirms, an obscure interpretation is given to us, which introduces inconsistency where there is none, and thus destroys the true sense of the doctrine, leaving nothing but words, and in reality re-establishing the Mosaic teaching with all its barbarous cruelty. According to the commentaries of the Church, and those of the 5th century in particular, Christ did not destroy the written law, but confirmed it. But we are not told how he confirmed it, or how the law of Christ and the Mosaic law can be supposed to be united into one. We find nothing in these commentaries but a play upon words. We are told that Christ kept the Mosaic law by the prophecies concerning himself being fulfilled, and that Christ fulfilled the law through us, through the faith of men in him. No effort is made to solve the only question that is of essential importance to every believer: how these two contradictory laws, referring to life, can be united into one. The inconsistency of the text, which says that Christ does not destroy the law, with the one in which we read, "It has been said, but I say to you." Indeed, the contradiction between the whole spirit of the Mosaic law and the doctrine of Christ remains in all its force. Let everyone who is interested in this question examine for himself the commentaries on this passage given to us by the Church, beginning from John Chrysostom to the present time. It is only after having read these that he will see clearly, not only that no explanation of the contradiction is given, but also that a contradiction has been skillfully inserted where there was none before. The impossible attempts at uniting what cannot be united are clear proof that this was not an involuntary mental error, but was effected with some definite purpose in view, that it was found necessary, and the cause of its having been found necessary is obvious. Let us see what John Chrysostom says in answer to those who reject the Mosaic law. Commentary of the Gospel according to St. Matthew, Volume 1, pages 320 and 321. Quote, "On examining the ancient law that enjoins us to take an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth, the objection is raised, how can he who speaks thus be righteous? What answer can we give? Why, that it is, on the contrary, the best token of God's love towards man. It was not that we should really take